everyone, and welcome to Marketing and Sales Over Cocktails, the weekly podcast that helps you grow your business, improve your life, and enjoy yourself along the way. I'm your host, Alan Langer, and every week we try to bring you the best thought leaders, the best business leaders, and the best minds out there to help you succeed in business and in life. So sit back, relax, grab your pad, your pen, and your favorite beverage, and enjoy the next episode of Marketing and Sales Over Cocktails. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Marketing and Sales Over Cocktails. This is your host, Alan Langer. We are on episode, I always have to look, number 39. Episode 39 is ready to go into the bank tonight, and we've got a great guest coming up. Where are you from? Actually, I don't remember. You're in. So
I'm actually living 2 hours north of New York City, just outside of Hudson.
City. So this is going to be Jordana ZELDIN. This is kind of a weird. I normally introduce before I ask a question, but I wanted to say she's from, and I forgot. So
upstate New York, let's say.
Upstate New York is Jordana. So before we get to Jordana, because I'm very excited for this conversation, a couple of quick announcements. One, don't forget the Ask Alan segment. Send me a question. We've got a really cool question tonight. Way out from Alabama. We've got Josephine from Alabama who sent in a question tonight. If your question is read on the air, you get a free signed copy of my book. So Josephine will be getting a copy of my book once we ask her question, and we'll tackle that question at the end of the podcast. To send in the question, go to the website, marketingandsalespodcast.com. Click on the contact page, and you can send in the question from there. So we have, without further ado, Jordana ZELDIN from upstate New York. Jordana owns a company. She's a sales coach and a founder of Spring Training, it's called. And Spring has two eyes, and we're going to get to that in a minute. But first of all, Jordana, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me tonight. How are you?
I'm well, Alan. How are you?
I am good. So we start every one of my podcasts with, what are you drinking this evening? Because I have a glass of Chianti. What do you have?
So I am drinking a Grenache, a red wine.
Okay, well, cheers to your Grenache. A virtual cheers right there.
Cheers.
There we go. I normally have tequila and something, but it's a little early for that, so I decided to go with Chianti tonight. Well, thank you for joining me. So this is pretty exciting. Jordana and I met, like most of my guests, on LinkedIn. She's a LinkedIn sales geek like I am, and we like to meet people and talk sales all the time. And we just met one day, liked each other's posts or something. I don't remember what it was, but we started talking, and we found some common ground, a lot of common ground, actually. So tell us how you went from where you are to now starting your own sales coaching and training company, and why it's called Spring with Two Eyes Training.
Yeah. So originally I thought I was going to be in the theater or the art world. And I spent the first 5, almost 10 years of my life directing plays and running an arts organization.
No kidding. Wow.
It's true. Yeah. And my entree into B2B was kind of accidental. There was an art world technology company, a venture-backed tech company whose mission was to bring all of the art world online. And really, they just needed people who were fluent in chatting with their ICP, which was gallerists. So I joined the B2B sales team, never having sold B2B, though, as you and I have talked about, I sold futons when I was in my teens. And it's interesting. I'd say that in the beginning, really in the first year of my time as a seller, I had a pretty uncomfortable relationship with the idea of even being a salesperson. I felt really uneasy about it. I felt that I needed to be somebody else in order to sell effectively. That, not surprisingly to you, Alan, was not serving me at all. And the big shift came when we got a fabulous head of sales who invested in coaching us one-on-one and really emphasized the point that our humanity, our quirks, our own personalities are exactly what belong in our selling. And it was when I brought myself to my work that I took off and felt like I really knew what I was doing. My results soared. And around that time, once I hit my own stride, I thought, all right, I want to share what I've learned. And I started coaching my colleagues, new hires. And I got so much fulfillment from the coaching work, more fulfillment than I had from my own sales wins, that I decided I wanted to be a sales coach full time. So
that's a fascinating point you just made, because so much of our lives are shaped by the people we meet. Like, imagine if that first sales manager who trained you one-on-one and was amazing turned out to be a typical sales, numbers only asshole, for lack of a better word. Yep. Your whole sales, everything could have changed. You might not even be in sales anymore.
I guarantee you that I would have not been in sales.
It's amazing how that how your life can be affected so easily by one person.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And then, when I decided that I wanted to, become a sales coach full time, I found an amazing sales training organization called Sales Gym, where I coached for a year, and we were coaching, team members from the Fortune 500 and beyond. And that's where I really think I gained my traction and started to pick up some approaches to coaching that once you see how effective they are, you can't unsee them. And I've brought that directly into the work that I do with sellers at Spring Training, which is now my own coaching consultancy.
For me, I never had that. I had that single mentor when I was very young in my 20s, when I was actually doing marketing and public relations for college athletics. That's kind of where I started my career.
Oh, yeah.
When I got into sales, I spent my entire sales career with like this look of on my face, because I'm like, I couldn't believe what they were training. Yeah. It was just it just never felt right to me, but it never clicked until one day I decided, like, I'm just going to do my own thing, because everything they're training me to not be myself, to follow the sales script, to always be closing, to handle the objections, to all this crap. I was just like what they trained, a 28% closer, 38% closer, 30% closer. And then once I started becoming myself and realizing that that's what really makes you a successful salesperson, that's when I took off. So it sounds like you follow the same philosophy.
What was it, Alan? I'm curious to know, what was it that kept you in sales and deciding to try a really different approach?
Well, I mean, even though I was closing 30%, the money was still better than I ever made. So it was, for me, for a young guy, making 80 grand a year, 90 grand a year was pretty good. And that was at closing at 30%. But then when I spent the last 10 years of my career closing 60 to 70% when everyone else was at 30, and I was tripling everyone else's revenue.
Wow.
That's when sales was, but it wasn't about the money for me at that point, because when you actually start forgetting about the money and you forget about the numbers, you actually start selling a lot more and you feel a lot better about yourself. And that's what that's what I try to train, is everyone is so focused on their numbers and hitting their quotas and making their money and their commissions. When if you just forget all about that, you will be such a better salesperson and you'll feel so much better about yourself.
It's so true. And it's also just adding on to what you're saying that, oftentimes sellers they're so focused on their bottom line and what they can take from a prospect. And it doesn't feel good to take, right? But it feels really damn good to give. And I think once you make that shift, that no, selling isn't about taking, it's about helping, it's about serving, it's about sharing knowledge, it's about making people feel like they have more information and can make better business decisions on just a soul level.
Yeah.
Really
it just, the whole Bob Berg book of, go givers sell more. Like when you're in a giving mode and you're in a helping mindset,
everything changes.
Everything is better. Your customer, and even if I actually train, you don't have to sell every customer. And when I say that, people are like, what are you talking about? I'm like, there are customers you don't need to sell. First of all, they may not need your product, or you may not be the right fit. But if you point them in the right direction or you help them in some way and walk away from the sale, you know how much that's going to come back to you? It comes back to you tenfold. Yes. I've seen it 1,000 times. And these trainers out there that just drill into their reps that you got to make your 60 calls a day and you got to sell this by the end of the month. That's why there's such a high turnover rate in sales, because you're just getting burnt out because it's not fulfilling at all.
No,
with that mindset.
Yeah.
I actually thought of something today that, you think of something, it pops in your head and you write it down. And it's like, someone said to me during a conversation today that they didn't like the sales tactics that the company was being trained. And it dawned on me that the term tactic is really a war term. It's an actual term used for like war strategy, like the tactics of outflanking your opponent. And I'm like, wow, that's actually being used pretty commonly in the sales vernacular. Like, here's my closing tactic. Here's the way I can conquer the customer and outflank them and outthink them and make them buy something that they don't need. And that dawned on me, like, that's a crazy word to have in sales.
I think there's also the term battle cards as well, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I had a realization the other day. We talk a lot in sales about, at its best, sellers are Sherpas or guides or trusted advisors, right? But I was thinking the other day, I think really what we are is architects. And I don't only mean architects of what each step in the process is going to be, but also, as any good architect or artist, like what each step in the process feels like. And that includes beginning off the conversation and setting the kind of tone that you want to set for the process to follow. And that, for me, means transparency, honesty, openness, autonomy, right? Giving your prospect the freedom to say no, and proactively really considering, being really aware of weaving those elements, those kind of qualities into the tenor of your conversation in service of creating a kind of psychologically safe space where your buyer feels safe enough to open up. That's another thing we take for granted, Alan. I'm sure you have felt this too, that like our buyer is going to meet a perfect stranger and then we're entitled to know all of their deep, dark secrets and problem. I mean, that's crazy. Like, we as sellers have a job to do to make it a space where it opening up in that way, the way that we expect and take for granted, is actually possible. Yeah, so that we can determine, if it's a good fit. Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's amazing because people, the first chapter of my book is why people hate salespeople.
Yeah.
Like, I did a survey. I've mentioned this before on the podcast. I asked 269 people that walked into a coffee shop over a 3-week period this one question: do you like meeting with or talking with a salesperson? And all 269 people said no. And it wasn't even like, well, sometimes. They were emphatic no, never, ever do I like meeting with a salespeople. And I was like, wow, that's crazy, because we all have to buy something. So salespeople become necessary evils almost. It's like, I got to buy a car. I got to go to the car dealership. I don't want to do that. I got to buy a mattress. I got to go to the mattress store and deal with the guy in the polyester suit. All of those stereotypes come to your mind.
Yeah.
But the stereotypes are there for a good reason, because people have constantly been ripped off and felt uncomfortable by salespeople for decades and decades.
Well, think about it, because that means that most, 99% of the population is coming to the selling conversation very armored up. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
so
absolutely.
our first step in the quote unquote sales process is not to sell or to talk about it's literally to disarm.
Yeah. Take that armor down.
To take that armor down. And how do we do that? And that's a big part of what I, work with individual clients and teams on achieving.
So that's a great segue. So tell us, give us a couple of tips on how you would do that. Does it depend on the industry? Does it depend on the client's personality? What do you say to someone who you're training about disarming a customer who's got those walls up?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think, and this is a kind of thinking work in progress, but my sense is that many of the same rules that apply to building trust outside of a selling context are directly applicable inside a selling context. And I believe that prospects or human beings really need a couple of things in order to feel ready to disarm. And I think one of those things is to feel safe. One of those things is to feel seen and heard, right? Paid attention to, like people are interested in them. And the other thing is to feel free and autonomous. And I think, and this connects to the course on agendas that I teach, called the Power Agenda, that it's possible in the very early moments of the selling conversation, separate from rapport or talking about the weather or whatever people like to talk about. And I don't even think that's necessary. But in the way that you set the stage for the conversation in your agenda, to weave in all of those components, making a prospect feel safe, seen, and free. And just, super tactically, I can tell you about some of the steps if you're interested.
Yeah, definitely interested. So, I mean, is this part of your training process, that steps that you just mentioned? And is it like, do you have a specific way you train that?
Yeah, it's funny. So I developed my own acronym for what this agenda, the steps that this agenda follows. And it's actually fittingly called DISARRM with 2 S's.
No kidding.
But yeah, it was serendipity that I was able to find a way to get that acronym. But really, I think it first starts before you even deliver your agenda with a kind of mindset check. And going into your selling conversation, not only aware of your own goals and what you hope to achieve, but really being cognizant of why the buyer is having a conversation with you. And as you're presenting your agenda and beginning to express the purpose of the meeting, this is the first step, D, desired outcome, is making sure that that outcome is really aligned with the reason that they are likely having this conversation with you. Mm-hmm. So as an example, it's rather than, the whole purpose of this meeting is to determine, if we're going to be moving forward and talking about next steps. It's something like, the purpose as I see of this meeting is to make sure that you come away with all of the information that you need to feel really confident making a decision either way about whether or not we can be a fit for you. Right.
Right. So that's D. What's ISSARM then?
So good question. So I are items, right? Every agenda has items. And one of the keys as it relates to items is to make sure, and this is a tendency in like most agendas, to dispense with focusing on yourself, what you want to do next, and to use more collaborative language, like from there we can, or why don't we, or let's, right? To underscore the collaborative nature of the interaction, but also to make sure that you get rid of anything that feels driving or overly rigid. And the word that often comes up in most agendas is will. Next, we will do this, then we will do this, then we will do this.
Right.
And one of the reasons that sellers often tell me that they don't use an agenda is because it feels too formal. But there's a way to structure it where you're saying, from there, if it feels right for you, maybe we can, or it might be helpful to explore, right? Mm-hmm. So using that softer language. So those are just the items, but some tips on how to deliver them in a way that is client-focused, collaborative, and not overly rigid.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Alan.
No. I was just saying. I was thinking of there are so many companies that train their reps. There a few of them will remain nameless, but they train them to like go through a checklist and a questionnaire. And I would be watching these sales demonstration, and if they're in front of, most of these companies are B2C, and they'd be sitting there literally asking a question and looking at a clipboard and answering it so detached from the customer, like they were basically filling out a medical form at a doctor's office. And I'm like, how is this? This is the beginning of the sales process that they're actually being trained to do. And the company thinks that is absolutely necessary to gather all the information that you need. And they're doing is making those walls thicker and thicker and thicker.
That's right, because there's no interest in the prospect's needs or experience, because likely all of those questions are qualification questions to benefit the company.
The company, absolutely.
Right. So what's important, if you're thinking about agendas, is making like the outcome client focused, using a lot of collaborative and flexible language. An agenda is just a starting point for an active living dialogue, right? It's not some like law.
Right.
And then from there, S is space, where you kind of leave the agenda for a second and say, by the way, I just want to say, if at any moment you have a thought or a question or something is unclear, feel free to speak up, right? So you're giving them the permission. From there, the next S is next steps. You want to proactively bring up the idea of next steps. But oftentimes sellers are taught that they need to do so assumptively. And that is so stupid because that just takes away all the freedom and autonomy that a prospect feels. And they feel like, oh my God, I'm locking myself into having to. But no, it's about saying, and by the end of this conversation, if you're feeling ready to explore what next steps could look like, we can do that, right? But it's on the prospect's term. So again, it's like we're signaling this is a collaboration. I see you, I hear you. This is about your needs. You have freedom, right? And then the ask, and not to bore everyone, but the ask is not, does that sound good? Which is also most asks at the end of an agenda, but it's, but before we dive in, I want to ask, what's the most important thing that you want to get out of the meeting today?
Mm-hmm.
Or what do you want to make sure that we talk about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Inviting them to collaborate and begin to contribute. And then finally, the R is real talk, where you go for the no, essentially, and say, look, I am a super straight shooter. If at any moment, what I'm telling you feels like, this isn't a good fit, or it's the worst thing ever, or anywhere in between, do I have your word that you're going to be straight with me? And they commit. Yeah. And then you say, well, and if I find out, that we're not the best fit for what you need, I'm not
going to try to sell you something you don't need.
And then M is move on. And then you just get into the meeting.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the thinking for how to start to telegraph those signals of safety and seeing and autonomy, so that, you take off the armor.
I would do something very, very simple.
Yeah.
And it was so effective because, again, I spent a lot of time in the B2C space. So I was in homes. I was literally meeting people in their living rooms. That's pretty much one step up from cold calling. And you're there. They don't want you there. They hate the fact that there's a salesperson in their house. And I would walk in, and the first thing I would say is, just so you know, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I'm not here to give you like one of those dog and pony sales show. That's not going to happen. And they would be like, oh my God, really? Like they just would, they would just exhale just from that one sentence.
Brilliant.
And then I'd be like, tell me why I'm here. What issues are you having? And there was no sales pitch. It was right about, tell me your problems.
Yeah.
And it was immediately, for the most part, completely disarming. Come on in, have a seat, let's sit in the living room kind of thing. And the other thing I would say is, you never talk about your product until you know what their problems are. The biggest problem I see in sales is everybody leads with their product. And you don't even know if the product's going to solve their problem. You're just leading with a product. I'm like, well, what if they don't need the product? Or what if the problem is different than what your product solves? You don't know that until you find out what the problem is.
Yeah, right on. Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is great stuff. I love that disarm stuff. Do you, this came up and it's just dawned on me, so hopefully I'm not throwing a curveball at you, but do you, this came up today in a conversation. When you're training someone, it's mostly B2B, I'm assuming, right? That you're training people with?
B2B.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you talk about either price conditioning or price presentations? And do you see people, I see one of the real deficiencies in sales is how to present the price properly. And do you talk about that, or do you have any of your sales, clients ask you about price presentations?
That's interesting. I'm trying, it's historically, yes. In the last little while, that hasn't been the focus. But what's interesting, are you familiar with Todd Capone's book, The Transparency Sale?
Only from you when we had our pre-call, you told me.
Oh yeah. Okay. That's right. No, that's right. Okay. So I'm a huge fan, but one of the interesting things that he talks about that is surprising to a lot of people is that sales likelihood tends to go up when you reveal the price sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more.
Yeah. And I do too. And that's kind of counterintuitive, I think, for a lot of folks. And it's certainly not what the industry advocates kind of industry wide. Yeah.
They want you to present the price at the end after you're supposedly building all this value. But what you're really building, in my opinion, is you're building anxiety about the price rather than the value.
Exactly.
So if I train to condition or anchor pricing and talk about it right up front, so subconsciously they can prepare themselves, or they at least have an idea of where this range is going to be. So now it's not anxiety that's building. They're actually preparing themselves to almost say yes or no at the end of the conversation.
So when do you encourage your clients to bring up price?
It depends on the product, but almost immediately. Not in first 2 minutes, but when you're here's an example. When I would, in a B2C situation, no matter what it is, whether you're selling windows or roofs or you're selling mattresses, or retail is different because pricing is already out there. There's a reason for that. But let's say you're selling something that let's say it's a copy machine. Let's go to B2B. Maybe the person that you're talking to has an idea what a copy machine costs, but maybe they don't. So I would actually say, Mrs. Smith, do you think a copy machine is going to cost you $1,000 a month or $3,000 a month? And they would normally say, well, I hope it's not 3,000. Right. And you say, okay, well, we'll see what you need. And then I would literally just go on. But now the 1,000 and the 3,000, that range is anchored in her head. And it goes away, but it's sitting in there. And then when you obviously going to know what your price is. So when you come up as $2,000 a month, you're right in the middle of the range that you mentioned an hour ago. But she doesn't remember that it was just sort of anchored there, and it feels much more comfortable. You're not blasting her in the face with $2,000 a month without ever mentioning anything during the conversation.
That's interesting. That's
really
how
interesting. I handle it.
Oh, that's smart. That's smart. Yeah, I know that Todd talks about the idea of saying, just so that we're all on the same page here, you know, we're talking about from this range to this range. Is that within, you know, is that within the realm of possibility or way out of bounds? Yeah. Because if it's so far out of bounds, I mean, really, there's not much of a reason to have a conversation.
100%. And
there's wiggle room.
Yeah. If you're talking, if it's a $10,000 product and the person's budgeted for 1,000, why waste anyone's time? You're not going to get them from 1,000 to 10,000 unless they're lying about the 1,000.
No, exactly.
So the price for me, I think price conditioning is something that's sort of forgotten about in sales. And I think it's super, super important to prepare your prospect for what the price is going to be. So the anxiety is much less at the end. It eliminates I got to think about it objection a lot.
Well, also sometimes when you bring the elephant into the room, be it pricing or anything else, it's like you're naming the thing that would be on their mind anyway, that would be distracting them from hearing what it is that you're saying. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's smart.
Why do you think it's so popular now to build your own stuff online? You can build your car online from start to finish. From the wheels to the radio, you can build your car and you can see the price fluctuating. The customer knows what the price is. There's no anxiety. And then they walk into the dealership and say, here's the car I want. Here's my informational ammunition. So you don't, rip me off. This is what I want. That's a customer saying, I don't have to deal with the sales rep. I'm going to build exactly what I want. And I know how much it is.
Well, I think also, and Todd talks about this too in the book, but because most buyers are conditioned to buy online, we have to figure out how we can offer the same level of transparency that buyers have come to expect in our person-to-person selling. Yeah, absolutely. So let's switch gears for a minute, because we had a really great pre-call conversation about the sales industry in general. And the question we have from Josephine later is going to touch on this about the male dominated industry. I told you when I spoke to you, like I am actively looking for strong, successful, confident women to put on my podcast. And it's frustrating to me that I can't find as many. I found you, but I shake a tree and a bald white sales guy falls out of it because there's 1,000 of them. There's a dime a dozen. Nothing against bald white sales guys, but they're all over the place. Yeah.
So how do you, as a female, have you experienced? I know you said you were in a mostly a female organization, but have you experienced the domination of the male side of the spectrum in sales at all, in a training standpoint or in a working standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm very aware of it. And as I said to you, strangely, my team was one of the kind of rare unicorns in that we were an all-female sales team in a kind of female-dominated space. The art world, it's mostly women who work in the art world. Mm-hmm. But I see it everywhere. It's on LinkedIn, but what's interesting is that there are so many studies that have come out that show that women typically outperform men in their selling by leaps and bounds. And I think a lot of that comes down to, and it's difficult to not be stereotypically gendered here. And the sales leader who convinced me to bring myself into my selling had a ridiculously high EQ, and he was like a 23-year-old sales bro. So that's a rare combination. Right. But I think that, in selling, although this is changing, the fact that buying happens more in the emotional brain than the logical side of the brain, and that most salespeople are trained to speak to the logical side of the brain, and that women typically, not all, tend to have a higher EQs and are more attuned to what's happening emotionally, tend to be more empathetic. I think that's one of the most important qualities that a salesperson can have.
I love that the pendulum is swinging or coming back the other way, because you're right. I mean, I wrote in my book about the misogynistic sales world that I, spent 20 years in, detesting going to a sales meeting because it was, 65 guys in a room and 2 women. And all I did was sit there and feel bad for the women because they were just talking about all this bro culture stuff. And we're going to get to that question from Josephine in a second. But now it's not even like, genders are even becoming blurred. It's like, you're not even, I'm just so, it's really good to see that the bro culture, it's still there, but I think it's finally being diluted to a point where it's really benefiting and becoming a better industry because of it. But it's still definitely there. So it's just an interesting topic for me because I lived it, and I hear, I still hear people talking about it. And again, we'll see what Josephine says in a second. But
well, I think too, Alan, like thankfully there's more, people are talking about mental health in selling. People are talking about the importance of like company values and selling, and empathy and curiosity and all these things. So I think that that's making what was, primarily a male dominated field and has the reputation for being one a little more hospitable to women and also to introverts. Like, it's not just about women. I think we have this false sense that like to be a great seller, you have to be this like boisterous, happy, like, textbook confident. And that's just not true.
No.
And in fact, some of the strongest sellers that I've worked with are quiet and introspective and introverted, but are kind of solution oriented. They really want to help their clients, and their numbers are off the charts.
Yeah. And it the end of the day, it comes down to connecting with the customer,
Absolutely.
Understanding what they need, being empathetic, but connection is everything. Don't pitch, just connect. Forget the pitch. The connection is everything. And, there's a question that a lot of reps don't ask too when it comes to connection, because they're so they're so caught up in the pitch, they'll just keep going when they've already sold the customer, but they keep going anyway.
Right.
So a nice question to ask every now and then is, have you heard enough to make a decision? Like, how are you feeling?
That's
you always want to check in. How you feeling? Everything sound good so far? Have you heard enough to make any decision at this point? And it just, again, it goes back to being empathetic and listening to the customer and asking those type of questions.
There's a good question. I think Kevin Dorsey talks about it in his course, and I've seen it on LinkedIn. But before moving on to kind of the next steps or even to pricing, if you have decided to leave pricing to the end, it's something like, I'm curious, before we go to next steps, to what extent do you believe we can help you?
Oh, that's a
an
good
interesting one. Right?
Yeah, you're forcing them to answer the question on how good they think you are as the company.
Yeah. And how good do you think you are as the company as it relates to the problems that they're looking to solve? Yeah,
I like
that's a good one.
That is an excellent
I'm learning great questions every day. I'm actually reading the book now, Question-Based Selling.
Oh, really?
Which is supposed to be one of the great sales books. But yeah, absolutely. I think questions are one of them, as you probably one of the most powerful ways to absolutely. And that's where connection happens too.
Yes.
It's not about talking about sports or the weather or the fact that
no.
you came from the same place. No, it's about showing really a keen interest in them and their experience. Yeah.
Right. That's why when I do a podcast, I always have a bunch of questions written down. Yeah. But then I never get to them because it's just a natural conversation for me.
Right. Like you're good at connecting with people.
Well, thank you. Speaking of questions, we're going to segue into Josephine from Alabama. This is one of these, every now and then we get like a pretty good punch question. Like, many of the questions are good, but this one is, I kind of feel for Josephine. So she did write in from Alabama, and her question is, and this is going to kind of go back to what we just were talking about. She writes, how do I overcome the old boy bro sales bullshit in my company? Old boy bro sales bullshit. That's what she wrote in her email. It seems like I have to work twice as hard to gain half the respect. Josephine, I'm going to pass that to Jordana first, but I will say right now that I feel for you that you're even dealing with this sales bullshit that you're talking about. But let's tackle this for a minute. So how would you answer Josephine with that one, Jordana?
Well, first I'd say that culture is typically larger than one person, and it can be very hard to change a culture.
Right.
And as we were talking about, sales brodom goes far beyond your company, Josephine, and it's kind of the sales status quo in a way. So I think that wanting to do the work in service of commanding respect might be a bit of a futile effort, but that using your time in the role to learn as much as you can, to perfect your process, to help as many clients as you can, to deliver the kind of results that you know that you can achieve, so that you can use all of your great accomplishments, irrespective of company respect, as a kind of lily pad, whatever, if you're the frog analogy, I don't know, like, you know what I'm saying, to the next role where the culture is a better fit and where you'll be seen and respected for your work, would be my recommendation.
That's a brilliant answer. And I would add to that don't think that's every culture.
Yeah.
Jordana's true. Right. The boy bro culture is still out there, but it is dissipating. There are cracks in the foundation. I've seen it. I see it every day. I go into, 10 years ago, I'd go into an organization and there'd be 15 guys in the room and one woman. And now it's 7 and 7 or 8 and 7. So that's great to see. A lot more women or even gender neutral people are getting into sales. And that is becoming something of the past. However, it sucks that you're in this, but do what Jordana said is hone your skills. I guarantee you some of those guys in the room don't want to be in the bro culture, and you can probably, find them and kind of, learn from them, or you guys can kind of team up and figure out how to help customers better than the bro culture, talking about conquering sales and closing people and all that kind of stuff that usually is talked about. But just know that when you get out of there, find a culture that you can thrive in. Yeah. Don't accept a culture just because it's a job, because if you take sales as a job, then it's just a job. Sales is a profession, and you need to really enjoy what you're doing. And when you start helping people and feeling good about what you're doing, then you love what you do. And then the money is just gravy on top of it.
It's so true. And also, because of COVID, remote is now the norm. So if you're in a town in Alabama or a city in Alabama where maybe there aren't the kinds of, companies that culturally align with what you're looking for in a sales team, you have literally now the entire world as your potential next employer.
Yeah, absolutely. Because this is not going away. This Zoom stuff is not going away. I made a joke. I made a joke with my 12-year-old the other day. I'm like, what's going to come out of COVID when this is all over? She's like, what? I'm like, no more snow days. Snow days are gone. God. When it snows the next day, you're online.
No.
She said that. She's like, no. Yeah. So this is not going away. The online selling is here to stay. Obviously, face-to-face will come back, but there's going to be quite a few. I think a lot of initial calls are going to be on Zoom before the face-to-face happens. I think that's where we're headed when the pandemic is finally under control.
All the more reason to be extra human in your selling.
Extra human and know how to prepare yourself and have a nice background and be present and understand what you look like professionally, on a Zoom call.
That's important.
Sit there in a sweatshirt and with a dirty stain. I was on a Zoom call the other day. There was a guy had a stain on his wall behind him. Like, what is that?
It's true. It's funny. The professionalism, it really does matter. And just on the flip side, I think there's been something kind of wonderful and humanizing and leveling about the fact that everyone is just trying to make do at home. And I've found that selling conversations and business conversations have been, less formal, less masked as a result. So I hope that stays. That stays,
yeah. I
agree. No stains on. No, get those stains off the wall.
What I was like, what am I in a dorm room? Like, what is that? What is that? By the way, your background is awesome. I love how the white and the plant.
Thank you.
Very pretty. So, well, we are already at almost 40 minutes. So this has been awesome. I want you to, before we go, before I ask you how people can find you.
Yeah.
is there any parting advice? I always like to ask my guests, what if you were like, being abducted by an alien tomorrow and they said you have one thing to leave the world in sales, what would you say?
I think, not to be a broken record, but I think it's that you, human you, imperfect you, quirky you, the person that you are before you pick up the phone or log onto Zoom for your selling conversation belongs in your conversation. And that the more connected you are to yourself, the better the likelihood of your, meaningfully connecting with your prospects.
Love it. Absolutely love it. That's going to be in my teaser clip when this podcast comes out. So,
oh, cool.
So how do people find Jordana ZELDIN if they do need some sales training or just want to chat with you on LinkedIn? Where do they go?
So embarrassingly, I don't yet have my website, but I'm on LinkedIn a lot. Okay. So the place to find me is on LinkedIn. It's linkedin.in/Jordana ZELDIN. And I work both one-on-one with sellers and with teams. And if any of you are curious about what it could mean to have a private coach or bring me to your team, I'd be happy to talk.
And she's definitely worth it, folks. She's, we align, we connected immediately. I know she's good at what she does. And I am looking forward to our relationship going forward. And I wish you the best. Alan. I wish you the best of luck. And hopefully if I'm in upstate New York at some point soon, we'll stop and we'll have some wine face to face at some point. Jordana, thank you for joining me tonight. And thank you everyone for joining episode number 39 of Marketing and Sales Over Cocktails. Again, this is Alan Langer, your host. The website is marketingandsalespodcast.com. The Ask Alan segment, go to the contact section, send me a question, and just like Josephine from Alabama, you will get a free signed copy of my book if we use your question on the air. So that's it for episode 39. I'd like to thank everyone for joining. Jordana, thank you. For Jordana and me, everyone have a great night, and we'll see you again next time.
Bye, guys.
All right.